Sure. Sorry, I was just trying to figure if I'm horizontal or vertical screen, but thank you very much to Professor Basani, and thank you very much for everyone joining us from South Africa. And I'm Han Xiaoli. I'm a senior fellow at the China Institute of Fudan University. We also run a website called thechinaacademy.org. But thank you very much to Professor Brasani for giving us the opportunity of sharing the China experience together with our colleagues from South Africa and together to discuss what the future holds in this very turbulent, challenging, but also exciting times of the 21st century development. And with that, if I may pass it on to Professor Brasani, and from our side here, joining us today for this webinar is Professor Zhang Weiwei, the director of the China Institute at Fudan University, which is a key think tank in China, influential both in policy advisory level, but also among the public sphere. So with that being said, I'll pass it on to Professor Brasani. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Okay, good morning to you, moderator, and Prof. Zhang Weiwei, Deputy Minister Puti Manamela from Higher Education, who will be responding today, and everybody else who has joined us this morning. This is part of a series of webinars and masterclasses that we run as the National School of Government with the idea of opening frontiers of public discourse, targeting public servants and other senior leaders in the public sector. The idea being, in as much as you could be a director in a frontline service department, or you could be a councillor or a member of parliament, to the extent that you engage and understand some of the key global discussions, the work that you do might be affected by things happening elsewhere, and therefore by doing such webinars, we are hoping that we can open up those frontiers of knowledge, so that regardless of the work that we do in the state and society in general, we can sharpen our tools of analysis, broaden our perspectives, and of course be able to respond effectively to the challenges before us. There is nobody in the world today who's not affected by things that are happening in other parts of the world, especially in major capitals. You could be a public servant, very junior, working in a port of entry, and suddenly with the changes that are taking place on the tariffs and so on, the type of work that you do immediately changes. You could be working for a local government in a very rural area, remote area in South Africa or anywhere in Africa, where you are responsible for supporting small-scale farmers to export their products. The following day, you wake up, there are tariffs, there's disruption of global supply chain. Your work is immediately affected by decisions that are taken elsewhere. And that is why, therefore, we believe it is important that we open up platforms like these ones, where we have a conversation with the experts, both local and international, who can help us understand or give some clarity to some of the key developments that are taking place, so that we can respond there accordingly. That's the context in which, as the National School of Government, we partner with other institutions, with experts, to arrange platforms like these ones. And today we've got Prof. Zhang Weiwei. This is his third session with us, actually somewhere online, and others were in person. We've got, of course, we'll have another in-person session with him in August this year, where you will be invited to come and engage with him and several other experts that will be inviting. So mine is to greet you and welcome you, and then hand it back to Ms. Penn.
Hello, hi. Yes, so from our side, we'd like to have Professor Zhang Weiwei, who has been the longest proponent for the China model of development, and also his theories on why China has been able to develop peacefully and sustainably over the past half a century has influenced generations of Chinese youth. And I'm so happy that we have the opportunity of Professor Zhang Weiwei joining us today to share his perspective on what the role of the state, what is in the new century, what is demanded of the role of the state and the capacity of the state. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it on to Professor Zhang Weiwei for a brief introduction to be followed by one of his key speeches that we produced into pre-recorded video. So Professor Zhang.
So, thank you, Xiaoli. Thank you, Busani. Long time no see, Busani. And well, since I've already prepared a video lecture, which will be shown soon, I will discuss in this presentation what's called the Chinese model of economic modernization, in which I will elaborate a bit on state capacity and why it's important, and nature of Chinese state as a civilizational state, etc. And after this lecture, I will briefly touch on a few concepts. Then we'll go into the other parts of today's agenda, including Q&A. So that's all for my brief introduction. Thank you.
Okay.
This seminar is presented by Professor Zhang Weiwei, Director of the China Institute at Fudan University. The China Institute is one of China's most consequential think tanks, influential at both the policy level and in the public sphere. He was an interpreter for Chinese leaders in the 1980s, including Deng Xiaoping. 70 years ago, China ranked among the world's poorest nations. Today, it stands as the world's largest economy, a transformation achieved over the past century despite foreign invasions and civil wars. China achieved industrialization under a socialist system and without waging wars on others. In today's session, Professor Zhang will analyze the key stages of China's development, outline 6 defining features of the China model, and discuss their global implications for developing economies.
Hello, everyone. Since the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, China has successfully built up its economy and now become the world's largest economy by purchasing power parity. In fact, since 2014. And today, China is the largest industrial, manufacturing, and trading nation, with the world's largest middle class and extreme poverty completely eradicated in China. The life expectancy is almost 2 years higher than the United States. And now let's look at some basic statistics from 1979 to 2023. For all those decades, in average, China has enjoyed an annual GDP growth rate of roughly 8% a year, and the annual trade growth rate almost 14% a year. Its total GDP in terms of purchasing power parity reached $35.31 trillion for the year 2023 versus the United States, which was $27.4 trillion for the same year. So China economy was roughly 20 to 25% larger than the US economy in the year 2023. Now it's even bigger. And total trade volume in China reached over $6 trillion for the year 2023. It remains roughly at the same level up to now. And the poverty eradication, that's crucial. China has lifted over 770 million people out of extreme poverty. It's called the 2 assurances and 3 guarantees. Assurance for food, assurance for clothing, that's 2 assurances, and a guarantee for basic housing, basic medical service, and for compulsory education. So this has been achieved. This is achieved for all the Chinese across the country. So today in China, there's no abject poverty. And then you look at the average life expectancy in China. By the year 2021, China was 78.2. United States was 76.1. And last year, China reached 79 years old, but don't have the figure for the United States yet. And furthermore, if we look at the per capita daily consumption of protein, China is also higher than the United States. Per capita protein consumption in China is 124.92 grams. United States, that's 124.33 grams. Slight difference, but it's meaningful because China is a population of 1.4 billion people. And then if you look at the consumption of the per capita vegetables, that's comparison on a yearly basis, China is almost 3 and 4 times larger and more than the United States. China is 399 kilos vis-a-vis the United States, 147 kilos. And China also now at the forefrontier of the new industrial revolution. And China's modernization drive since 1949 can be broadly divided into 2 stages. The first stage from 1949 to 1978 is also called in China the first 3 decades under Chairman Mao, during which China laid its political, social, and economic foundations for its modernization program. Politically, China has established its political system, including the role of the Chinese Communist Party, the role of the National People's Congress and the People's Political Consultative Conference, and China institutionalized consultative democracy for decision-making, such as the drafting of the 5-year plans. Socially, China conducted land reform, so the dream of land to the tiller was achieved. And China achieved the women's liberation, comprehensive literacy program was carried out, and basic medical service was provided for all. Economically, China laid the foundation for an extremely comprehensive set of industries. And by 1978, China could virtually manufacture everything from toothpaste to tractors to satellites to nuclear bombs. Yet, in all fairness, China is still a poor country, especially in terms of per capita GDP. Even by the early 1980s, China's per capita GDP was lower than most African countries. Since 1979, Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping initiated the second stage of modernization. It's also called the year of reform and opening up. And on the basis of the first 3 decades, the Chinese economy began to take off, and China rising fast. As you know, China missed the first and second industrial revolutions due to historical reasons. Yet, since 1978, at the speed of accomplishing almost 1 industrial revolution every decade, China is now at the forefrontier of the 4th industrial revolution, with big data, AI, and quantum technologies. The story of DeepSeek is a good example of China's important advancement in science and technology in the new industrial revolution. And now China is the only country capable of providing goods, services, and experience from all the 4 industrial revolutions to the whole world. This is also the main reason why Donald Trump loses its tariff war with China, and the US economy is already far more dependent on China than vice versa. Indeed, the first group of countries rising up during the 18th and 19th centuries, like Britain and France, had a population around tens of millions. The second group of countries rising up during the 20th century, like the United States and Japan, had a population of around 100 million. And China's rise in the 21st century represents a population of over 1 billion, which is more than the total populations of the previous 2 groups combined. Furthermore, these Western countries rose up through wars and plunders by pursuing brutal colonialism and imperialism, while China's stunning success has been achieved in peace and under socialism. Naturally, China has its share of problems, which require our attention and earnest solution for sure. But China's overall success is beyond doubt. How to explain this success? Some claim it's due to foreign direct investment. But in comparison, many countries, especially Eastern European countries, have received far more FDI in per capita terms than China. Some claim that it's due to an abundance of cheap labor, but most developing countries offer cheaper labor than China. Some claim that it's due to authoritarian state, but by Western standards, there are many authoritarian states in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Arab world, yet they don't have this kind of economic miracle. If these explanations cannot explain China's success, we should think beyond the box. To my mind, it had to do with the fundamental nature of China as a state and the Chinese model of modernization. China is in many ways a unique country, and it is a civilizational state. It's an amalgamation of the world's longest continuous civilization with a super large modern state. And the country was first unified in 221 BC. It's an amalgam of hundreds of states into one over its long history. And this kind of state has some notable features I call 4 supers and 1 blend. First, a super large population. Second, a super vast territory. Third, super long traditions. And fourth, super rich cultures. And each of these features is a blend of old and new, a blend of ancient and modern socialist adaptations and innovations. Let's first look at China's super large population, a fact since the ancient times. And today, China produces more scientists and engineers a year than all the Western countries combined. And this fact alone is a game changer in the world today. As for China's super vast territory, which is again inherited from our ancestors, but the country is today connected by the world's largest and most advanced networks of high-speed trains, highways, and digital infrastructure, with 4G, 5G stations installed across the country, accounting for over 70% of the world's total, thus preparing the country better, to my mind, than any other countries to excel in the new industrial revolution. With regard to super long traditions, China's traditions have evolved, developed, adapted in virtually all branches of human knowledge and practices. For instance, the West is very critical of China's so-called one-party system. Yet, to most Chinese, it's nothing extraordinary. Since the first unification in 221 BC, China has been mostly governed by a unified ruling entity. Otherwise, the country would have disintegrated. China copied the American adversarial political model following its 1911 Republican Revolution. The country degenerated into warlords fighting each other with millions of lives lost. As for super rich cultures, China has vastly rich cultural heritages since ancient times, from literature to fine art to architecture to cuisine and beyond. For instance, diversity and harmony is a hallmark of China's religious culture. In China's long history, there were very few religious wars. There were other wars, but not religious wars. Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism coexisted, cross-fertilizing, which is a sharp contrast with so many religious wars throughout European and Western history till today. Now let me discuss with you the Chinese model of modernization per se.
From director.
Hello, hi. Let me reach out. I think John may have dropped offline.
No, is here.
Hello? Yes. Hi, let me just reach out to my team to see is Professor Zhang.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Can you see me?
Okay, I'm just reaching out to our tech support who is video casting the pre-recorded speech. Hello? Professor Zhang?
Hey, Xiaoli.
Hey. Okay. So the video is being broadcast from Professor Busani's side. So if we may do a progress check, if so if we may do a progress check, Professor Busani, your tech team is broadcasting the video. If there is a problem, would you mind if we move on to interaction and commentary?
Yes, we can move here. Yes.
Okay. Would you expect the video to
Okay, let me continue.
ready anytime
Pity
soon,
because
or
video is only 50% broadcast. I was about to come to the Chinese model, so I capture here in basically there are 6 features of the Chinese model. One is the pro-development strong state. Number one, that's important. Number two is a holistic interest party, not a partisan interest party, because this is from China's long history. In other words, you have to be a kind of overarching, unified governing structure. Otherwise, the state disintegrated. This is the nature of the Chinese state, civilization state, because amalgamation of hundreds of states into one over its long history. Number three, the process of leadership selection is called the selection plus election, rather than the Western model, which is election. Selection is far more important than election. And number four, practice-based reasoning. It's very pragmatic. It's called the criteria of lies in reality, practice, the result practice. You may say performance legitimacy. Number five, people's livelihood first. Whatever you do, political policy, economic policy, social policy, the list goes on. But it all end up in delivering something tangible for the people, both in material terms and non-material social terms. Number six, a mixed economy. In other words, the role of the state and the role of the market, they are mixed with each other. I'll give you an example. If you look at China's rapid development of its internet application, it's the best in the world, most developed in the world. The state sector is responsible for the digital economy, for the infrastructure, 5G, 4G, 5G installations across the country. If there is a village, there must be 4G or 5G facilities. As a result, this availability of this infrastructure laid foundation, and public sector have made the best use of this e-service. As a result, we have these very highly developed internet applications. And finally, I think the most important thing is a famous remark made by Chairman Deng Xiaoping when I was the interpreter. He met with African leader from Ghana, Chairman Rawlings, in September 1985. Chairman Rawlings was very much interested in the Chinese model of development. But Deng Xiaoping said, please don't copy our model. If there is any experience on our part, is to formulate policies in the light of your own national conditions. I think this is universally true. In other words, I think the Chinese model is important. It's successful for China, but for other countries, for South Africa, for African countries, you should, I think, find your own models of development in the light of your own national conditions. Now, concerning today's topic, governance and economic modernization and why state capacity matters, I just will make a few brief comments. Here, three concepts are important. One is governance, the other economic modernization, the third one is state capacity. Now, concerning governance, because I have long argued since 20 years ago, we should really change paradigm. Because in the Western political philosophy, the paradigm is democracy or autocracy. And democracy defined by West, by the West model, multi-party system, one person, one vote, and the so-called free media, etc. But even United States, Donald Trump did not believe in that. So obviously, this model is in deep trouble. I long advocate we should use another paradigm, which we call the good governance or bad governance. To use this paradigm to define really the political nature of a successful system. And good model or good governance can take form of the Western model, but can also take form of non-Western model. And Chinese model is that kind of model. Then people will see why you cannot, discuss this issue of democracy. In fact, I would describe the Western model of democracy as procedural democracy. We have discussed democracy in both in procedural terms, in substantial terms. The substantial terms of democracy is about the purpose, objective of democracy, which is good governance. So when we focus on good governance, then we should really derive from our own national context, cultures, and traditions, and also whatever good practice from outside, from foreign countries, even from the West. Take China's example. Selection is from China's own tradition, but we invented the examination system for civil servants. Election from the West. We combine both to produce a better system. In other words, we have to really have something indigenous with roots in our own culture and civilization. Now, concerning economic modernization, I just, in that particular video lecture, you have seen my key points. So I don't want to elaborate too much on that. You can review the contents in that particular video. Now, for state capacity, I just give you a very it's not anecdote, it's an experience China had gone through. In the 1980s, when I was still working in the Chinese Foreign Ministry as a senior interpreter, there was an amazing discussion on which model China should adopt. Then some think tanks were debating with each other on which model in the world is successful and which model is not successful. They came to a very succinct summary. It's oversimplified, but it's useful for perhaps your reference. They divide everything into hard and soft. So the Soviet model is called hard state, hard economy. Hard state means authoritarian, rigid. Hard economy, tightly centrally planned. So it's hard economy, hard state. It's successful for a time, but in the end, with the breakup of the Soviet Union, obviously it had its deep problems. They also have the Western model called the soft state, soft economy. Soft state is for the liberal democracy, freedom of speech. Soft economy, which is more or less driven by private sector, is the Western model. But Chinese think tank found that model may be working for the West, but not working well for non-Western countries, for developing countries. So we also say no to that model. They also have the Indian model, which is a soft state and the economy, which means the state is a democracy, in nominal terms at least, and freedom of speech, yet with very hard economy, which means centrally planned, rigid, not working very well. Up to 1991, when India began its own economic reform, liberalization, the system became more loosening up. And they have the hard state, soft economy, which is called the model of the little dragons in Asia, the model of Singapore, South Korea, Chinese Taiwan, and Chinese Hong Kong, in the 1980s at least. You have a strong state pro-development, yet the economy is much more liberalized in many ways. Of course, this is an oversimplified characteristic summary of their experiences, but that approach, in the end, Chinese leaders at that time think the hard state, soft economy is a slightly better model. So China is moving more or less along this line, along the line of the little dragon, four dragons in East Asia. Of course, China is 100 times, 10 times, 20 times, 50 times bigger. And now the Chinese model is much more sophisticated. So strong state means you have a holistic interest political party, which can ensure overall political stability. Chairman Deng Xiaoping said famously, he said, for a country as large as China, you need at least 100 years stability before you can become modernized. Otherwise, if you adopt Western political system, you cannot even ensure 4-year political stability or 10-year political stability. So economic development becomes much more difficult. It's also to ensure macroeconomic stability. That's also important through various policy initiatives that China does today vis-a-vis the American tariff war and trade war and tech war. Otherwise, there will be chaos. And then it's also necessary for long-term, for producing strategic planning, 5-year plan, 10-year plan, and have them executed. I just give you a simple example. For instance, Europe is known for this Green Deal, energy transition from traditional energy to renewable energy. A lot of fanfare, a lot of discussion, a lot of debates, but not much achieved. But in the case of China, we have a 20-year plan, 4 5-year plans, and now China has succeeded in its own Green Deal, energy transition from traditional energy to renewable energy. China is now the largest producer of solar panels, EV vehicles, and renewable energies. The traditional energy is more costly in China today than renewable energy. So this is a revolution. In other words, we challenge the Western political model. Can you deliver that kind of green revolution? I could give you other more examples. Given the time limit, I will not continue with that. So I'll stop here. Basically, the Chinese nature of the Chinese state and also the Chinese model and state capacity, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Zhang Weiwei. Professor Bassani, just checking in with tech from your side, if everything is okay. Would you like to move on to conversation with your guests from South Africa?
Yes, we are ready. So Deputy Minister Manamela will make remarks and then pose some questions before we open it up to everyone else. The colleagues should ask questions on the platform of asking questions or through the chat. We will respond to those questions later on. But for now, let me hand over to Deputy Minister Manamela, Deputy Minister for the Department of Higher Education and Training. DM?
Thank you, Principal, Prof. Nyaweni, and also to Professor Zhang. It's a pleasure always listening to your, I think, insightful thoughts around the development of China and I think over the last 70 years, and also what lessons we can learn from the China model. And I think I quite found some very interesting points that you've raised around state capacity not being a technical issue, but importantly being a civilization defining one. And I think that we are finding ourselves, in a situation where if I'm, the model that you've spoken about, it would be interesting to see how, that model around, either hard state or hard in economy, or a mix between those two, and what becomes the role of the state, but how we define, the South African state. But I want to start it with some of the, points around, how acutely aware we are, in terms of the polycrisis, and I think the triggers currently, obviously the global, tariff wars, which I believe are beginning to shift and to force us into rethinking, trade protocols that have been agreed to, which has obviously, advantaged the US and the West, and I think so that being part of the impact of the polycrisis on the one hand, but our own local challenges, issues around, unemployment, issues around poverty, inequality, and the role that the state needs to, play, and whether the mix around a soft state and probably a soft economy. I think within your framework, that's how, I would interestingly lean towards characterizing what the South African state is being. And I think some of the lessons over the last few years in in how we responded to some of the triggers of the polycrisis, and I think before this, was the COVID-19 pandemic, and before the pandemic, the global financial economic crisis of 2008, and of course, some locally argued that we resembled resilience during the global economic crisis in 2008 because we had built, state capacity and state institutions to be able to shield South Africa from that. A strong reserve bank with a long history, and some of the fiscal controls, but that on its own, because of probably soft economy, did not yield into positive results in terms of economic growth, but also in terms of dealing with unemployment, dealing with poverty, and so on and so on. So the question of strong state and strong institutions and the kind of results that they yield, I think is probably one element that we'll have to examine. One of the interesting points, Prof. Zhang, that you raised elsewhere, was around the question of the role of the state in terms of maintaining public order, and public order essentially being an important instrument towards stability, both political and economic, and societal stability. And I found that even in your exploration today of the different characterization of what I would refer to as the Asian states, indicates that it is not only a question of uniformity, but it is a question of exchange of ideas, around certain common areas that you may find, and I think you mentioned there around the consistency of maintaining public order that's relating to some of the successful Asian states. Now, if you take that with regards to the role of the state, either in South Africa or in some of the African states, I would concede to the point you're making that we should not be seen to be mimicking Western democratic models, and so. But we have a history, a much stronger history of colonization, and we are also emerging from a state whose public order, was maintained in the to the detriment of the majority of the population. And of course, it meant, it could have probably meant that we keep the South African society, somewhat controlled and slowly modernizing. But that period also happened, when the world itself, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And so we essentially found ourselves, getting into a democratic space, which was globally almost unipolar. So what was defining what democracy is at the time, which is what we adopted, and some of the principles which we've also historically, argued for, were being maintained. So I think the question of, how we balance a strong state and the kind of democratic principles, and maybe we need to go back around lessons of, South African traditions and democratic practices and how we integrate those with our modern experiences. But I think that intricate balance where, people have long-term developed distrust towards actions of the state, is crucial. Something which is, I think, probably a bit different when it comes to, to China. Then So yes, strong institutions, and I think, as I said, we displayed that during the global economic crisis, and similarly during COVID-19, where that element of public order and the role of the state, was visible, but that harmed the economy, quite horribly, and I think we yet, to recover from. The impact of the global, of COVID-19. And so all of these lessons, and I think, and from the framework that you've laid, I don't know if I acknowledge the point that you make that we have to develop a South African or African model based on the conditions that we find ourselves. But there are common trends, Prof. Zhang, that exist within the global South. Mostly, historically colonized, mostly having played, an extractive role, to the US and to the West, in terms of their economies, mostly have experienced, destabilizing effect when they were beginning to build democratic institutions, and so on, interference. And so there are common trends, and therefore I would argue that, there would be common lessons, for us to learn. One of the reasons that, the unipolarity of the world was maintained, for such a long period, has been because, the US did not seek to build itself as an enclave of power, but rather exported that, enclave of power throughout the world, and so created puppets and collaborationists in that particular agenda. Now, the point is, for a different developmental agenda for the West, for the global South, it is, yes, we should be able to learn lessons from each other, and I think that's important, and apply those to our own conditions. But I also think that we need to be thinking around, solidarity, that if we are to build a strong state, if we are to, that puts the interest of the people and their livelihoods, at heart, that no one will be safe, if we build this enclaves of development amongst ourselves without, building solidarity. And I think initiatives such as BRICS, and our chairperson Sheep, for instance, of the G20, seeks to, become platforms of building global, solidarity. So the reality is, with lessons learned from the Chinese experience, and I've articulated elsewhere from the, from the lessons that we can learn from China. I think it was from the World Bank report, which was detailing the progress that have made, which we really appreciate. But I think from all of that, most of the things that we would want, we should do, global peace, global solidarity, and so on and so forth, can only come from cooperation and not from building enclaves. And I think it's important that these kind of engagement shouldn't only be about this is where we are as China, but they should also be about, these are the kind of lessons, and these are the kind of solidarity networks. And I'm deliberately using that word solidarity network and not, multilateral partnerships, and so on, because I think solidarity is important. That it would require all of that from all of us, to achieve that kind of global world order. Importantly, I do not think that there is, well, there probably are any nation in the world where they do not aspire to build strong states, have a developmental agenda that benefits their own people. And in many instances, outside of the weaknesses that exist internally within those states, the destabilization of those states have been as a result of external intervention. Thank you very much, Prof.
No, thank you, DM. Prof. Zhang, you want to react to some of those points that he has made before we go to the other questions that have been raised?
Thank you, Deputy, for your comment. I just make a few points. One is in this world of multiplying crises, state capacity has become more and more important. Why, we have confidence that China will beat the United States in this tariff war. Of course, economically, as I said in my presentation, US depends far more on China than China on the United States. So this is already the result of the Chinese modernization model. For instance, if you look at the Trump's idea to have Apple or Microsoft away from China, back to the United States. But within China, say near Shanghai, we call the Yangtze River Delta or Pearl River Delta near Shenzhen Canton. We have this in the radius of 100 or 150 kilometers. You have all these spare parts produced by tens of thousands of factories, companies for Apple, for Microsoft, of course, for Huawei, for other projects. This kind of ecosystem is not available in the United States. It takes decades to build. China has it now. So the most comprehensive class of industries, etc. All these are a process of very long-term planning, as I said, with EV vehicles, 4 or 5 years, 20 years, 4 or 5 year plans, 20 years. Otherwise, you cannot do that. In the process, a lot of disputes over which approach China adopt. It's a battery or oxygen or other approaches, but we try every approach, and then we find the better approach is a better approach. If you look at the tariff war per se, when the Chinese produce these retaliation measures, countermeasures, it's well designed, precise, sharp, and to the point. The US, Donald Trump's whatever sanction measures are so, from our point of view, rudimentary and not to the point. In other words, it did not go through very careful planning and study. As a result, they punish themselves a lot. As a result, Donald Trump has to change his position from time to time. See, wavering this, wavering that. I'll give you a simple example. You look at the Chinese approach, I don't know how to say it in English, we call dimensional attack on the United States. Totally different approach. For instance, when we say we have a sanction on control of this export of rare earths, it's already a whole system is installed from the production of the rare earths in China to its processing to its exporting to whichever institution, everything is monitored through AI. So we say to South Korea, you cannot transfer that to the United States. If you do that, you'll be punished. So this is the type of way we have developed over the past 8 years in the process of trying to be independent of the United States, because we were subject to the first round of tariff attack back in 7 years ago in 2018. So state plays a very important role. Every sector, we have to study clearly whatever spare parts for the United States, we have to say within 5 years, 10 years, we get rid of the US spare parts. As a result, we're very confident the US is going to lose this tariff war, lose miserably, for sure about this. Now, concerning this overall situation, I think, Mr. Minister, you mentioned this solidarity among the global South. This is very important. The role of the BRICS is also very important. And for one thing, in a way, I'm thinking of China has played an important role. If you look at the financial crisis in 2008, or before that, Asian financial crisis in 1997, many countries, each time when there was a crisis, perhaps at least a dozen countries went broke. Yeah. This time, even a country as weak as Argentina was not exactly broke, except the small country Sri Lanka, which was broke, 100% broke. For one thing, because China held the foreign exchange reserve in US dollars. So we lend the dollars to these countries, to Argentina, as they can pay us back with Argentine beef or Chinese currency, whatever. That's also one way to say, there is the very existence of China and Chinese economic strength and power, and China demand for a lot of goods, minerals, and whatever. As a way, compared with previous crisis, it's already slightly better than before. If without China, it could become much more difficult. Now, concerning this, how to get rid of this whatever disputes, in the end, we moved to relatively pro-development, strong state, which is, I think, necessary for global South. But it's not easy, and especially the West had long practiced the divide and rule within each every developing countries. Even in China, they created a lot of followers for the Western political models who have to overcome this kind of resistance. But perhaps, we can start with, I think the best part of Chinese political system is what I call the consultative democracy. The process of decision making in China, it's very democratic. What we call this, something we learned from Soviet Union, democratic centralism. We discussed them at length with China, a huge country. If you produce a 5-year plan, it involves discussions, consultation with hundreds of think tanks, different levels of government, within the party, outside party, between think tanks, and on the internet with ordinary people. But in the end, you need a certain degree of centralization. So if only with democracy, with consultation, with debate, but without centralization, then you tend to have populism rather than real quality decisions. So if you look at the quality of Chinese decision as represented by 5-year plans and how they are able to be executed, because they are well designed and they take into consideration a lot of scenarios. In the end, decision can be made. So I think this level of consultative democracy is something I think many countries can evolve from their own tradition. For sure, from African traditions, from different both democratic and also with ability to what we call the front of people and then to the people, one round, and then from people again and to people again, several rounds of discussions. Then we can reach certain conclusions, and then work and put nation forward along this consensus, as that will be. For instance, when China started its economic reform, it started with a special economic zone. This idea of zones are also very important. You have the special zones in which you practice something different from the mainstream political life or economic life. So for many, many years, China's land was publicly owned, it cannot be sold. So we said, let's start with Shenzhen, with economic zone. Then we divide this land into land ownership and right to use land. Ownership is public, but the right to use land can be along the market principle can be sold and exchanged. So there's the land market in China. This quasi-privatization has worked well for a Chinese model. So these are my brief comments on your brilliant comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Zhang. So we're gonna get other colleagues to contribute. Anthony Julius, you've got a minute. You're gonna be followed by Evaristo. Please ask your questions, Anthony and Evaristo.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof. Zani. Thank you, Prof. Wang. My question is, listening to the Chinese model of modernization, all the points that you mentioned, I can relate to in the South African Constitution and in the Bill of Rights. And so my question is, do you think that in South Africa, we have some disjuncture between the purpose, which I would say is our constitution, and practice in South Africa, which manifests itself in the institutional design within the public sector to give effect to the purpose. We have a disjuncture. The one is Western, the other one is Eastern. The constitution, in my view, is Eastern, and our practice is Western. Thank you very much.
Well,
Evaristo.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Ngaweni. Thank you very much, Professor Zhang. My name is Evaristo Benyera. I teach African politics at the University of South Africa. Fascinating presentation. My question, Prof, is how do we build state capacity in Africa, given our history of colonialism and apartheid, which have made the citizens to distrust the state? Thank you very much.
Okay, Salim, the last one is from Salim.
Thank you, Professor Busani. Professor Zhang, thank you for your input. I just very quickly, I'm influenced very strongly by Professor Fukuyama and his writing on China and his assessment of how Chinese merit system has evolved over centuries. Unfortunately, the reality is we don't have centuries. So a lot of my colleagues, as you know, like going to China. I've been to China myself. We are quite admiring of the Chinese system, but we also realize what you have built up is not just a product of the current century, but has evolved over many centuries throughout your civilization. In terms of Fukuyama's analysis points us to the USA as being one of the few countries actually that has created a merit system in a modern age. They've not done a very good job, but they're amongst the few modern countries which managed to rapidly change their system during the Great Depression and move towards a merit-based system by employing younger people, by the business sector influencing government to be more merit-based, but also by strong civil society push. So in a nutshell, my question is, given our own history and our own political dynamics, how do we move rapidly into a merit-based system since we don't have the centuries that you enjoyed in building up that system? Thank you, Professor Butani.
Thank you. Three great questions. Let me try to handle them one by one. From Chinese experience, you may wish to refer to my video lecture. I mentioned this Chinese, what we call the practice-based approach to China's modernization. In other words, in the Chinese approach to reform and modernization, we had to do with the Chinese culture. We are different from the Western culture. which is very much about so-called constitutionalism. So if you look at the Western imposed reforms in Russia, Eastern Europe, in Africa, it starts with amendments of constitutions. So abandon the one-party system, and then introduce private ownership. The Chinese approach is experimental. Let's do it. In other words, in the Western model, you produce a roadmap, and then you do accordingly. Usually, it ends up in more failure than success. The Chinese model is you only have a compass. You have a sense of direction. The direction at that time for Deng Xiaoping is to improve rapidly as possible, people's living standards. And under this principle, you are allowed to try out different approaches. So the Western reforms start with the amendments of constitutions. Chinese reforms start with experiment in special zones. If they are good, they are well, they are executed, produce good results in terms of improving people's living standards, then we try to amend our laws, legal systems, eventually constitutions. So this different approach, the Chinese approach is much more pragmatic. So I wonder whether in South Africa, in other global South countries, we can also try this approach. In other words, we start with experiment. So within particular zone and department or area, we try out certain new approaches, which may deviate slightly or from the existing prevailing legal framework. Yet we said this is for experiment to make sure. In the end, if it's working, we start fix the laws. Western approach is much more legalistic approach. It's very rigid, which is not good for reform. The same way American system, why it's failing so fast. One particular problem is it's excessive legalism. As a result, cannot make any reforms. Because if you want to reform the gun control system, you have to revise the First Amendment. But if you want to revise First Amendment, I'm sorry, you have to have 2/3, 3/4 of the congressmen, senators, both within the federal system and within the state system to agree. On the U.S. political system, it's inconceivable. So you can never change that. In the Chinese philosophy, we have what we call the Dao, which is overall purpose, and Shu, which is specifics. Specific is the legal system. Above that, there is an overall purpose, Dao. So Dao decides everything. If Dao said we should protect people's life first, and specifics about this legal system for gun controls must be changed. So as a result, we can do that. Perhaps, we should need to find some way to move in that direction. Otherwise, no reform is conceivable. So we have to rather than rigid excessive legalism, we need certain pragmatism and down to a spirit, can-do spirit to make things work. And consider the second question, the distrust in the state. This is a serious problem. In other words, you have to go through a process. In fact, I even went through part of the Cultural Revolution. Chairman Mao at that time think the Chinese political system is already on the verge of what he said, revisionist. They have to change the system from grassroots. So people also lost a lot of trust in the political institutions. The Chairman Mao said the rebellion is only normal. But even at that time, during the Cultural Revolution, people still have trust in Chairman Mao. And Chairman Mao cannot be wrong. So this is something perhaps within Chinese tradition. If the state in the Anglo-Saxon culture is called the state necessary evil, in the Chinese culture, state is always a necessary virtue. So that gives people trust in the state. It could go through a certain stage of less trust or even distrust. But on the whole, trust predominates the Chinese tradition. Perhaps, because China tradition based on a competent bureaucracy selected through exams in the past, and now we call the selection plus election. So perhaps, I don't know, I cannot advise South Africa or other countries, but the idea is perhaps we can start with something small, something tangible, something within a special zone or within one city where a particular party is stronger, say, and then you can say, let's do something new and try to work out. Then say whether we can apply this to other parts of the country. Then I come to the third question. We have no time. Everything hard. We don't have centuries time to go by. But at the end of the day, it's always long-termism produce better results. Short-termism cannot work properly. Even in the case of China, China is a country we always say we have gone through a century, 100 years of humiliations from 1840 to 1949. So over 100 years, 1 century, China was bullied, defeated by West, went through famines, economic chaos, wars of aggression from foreign countries, and occupation of capital of China by foreign countries. And I made a rough calculation. During this particular 1 century, the maximum continued stability of China was maybe 7, 8, or 9 years, no more than a decade. So China had gone through all that. In the end, when the Communist Party of China created New China, People's Republic, so people have learned a lot from the historical lessons, from the chaos. So the Chinese word, if you ask Chinese with whatever opinion surveys, what do you fear most? For most Chinese, it's 乱, which means chaos. People detest chaos, afraid of chaos, because China has gone through 100 years of chaos. So that's, in the end, in retrospect, the more you suffered in the past or your own history from certain problems, in the end, we are dialectical. That kind of bad results, whatever bad experience, created new momentum for trying out new approaches to modernization. If you look at the United States, you mentioned Fukuyama's discussion of the reform in the Roosevelt era. Now, with Donald Trump, you will see this problem of Roosevelt's success was quite short-term. It's again replaced by populism, now by extreme populism, represented by Donald Trump. So I think the problem is you have to find something, as I discussed with Fukuyama back in 2011 in the debate with him. I said the United States needs more political reform than China because your system has what I call the genetic flaws. Number one, the assumption human beings are rational. No, with social media, with money involved, politics become less and less rational. Human beings become less and less rational. So you need to have what I call democratic centralism. Otherwise, it will become more and more populism. He did not believe at that time. Now he has accepted this ugly truth in the United States. Populism undermines, destroys the US political system. I also said you have promote human rights, individual rights to the extreme. It will backfire. Yeah, rights and responsibility must be balanced. Otherwise, no modern society can survive. And also, I said this excessive legalism, procedures are all that important. This is wrong. There must be balance between procedures and substance. Otherwise, you will be in deep trouble. At that time, predict you are going to elect a leader president worse off than George W. Bush. So exactly, that's appearing again and again. So I think the Western model cannot work. I'm pretty sure about this. You may refer to an article I wrote for New York Times back in 2006. That was the time of first China-African summit held in Beijing. It's called the Attractiveness of Chinese Model. You can refer to that my name and on the Chinese model. I said why the African countries copy the Western model and fail. Same with other developing countries. At that time, I already predict Chinese model will be better and more suitable, perhaps for the global South. And the Western model will not work. Now, I will say it's even not working well for Western countries themselves. They have to reform themselves. Otherwise, there will be deep trouble because there's a competition for Chinese model. Our model works much better than the American model. Thank you.
Deputy Minister, you want to make some comments before we go to the other 5 colleagues who've raised their hands? DM, your reaction?
Oh yes, just some quick points. I think firstly, thanks, Prof. Zhang. I think you're raising an important point around how the law should follow practice or should follow objectives. So what is it that we want to achieve? And I think the discussion around the right for people to own life, to own guns, does it supersede the right of people to life, which somewhat mirrors the way in which we design our legislation. But importantly, Prof. Zhang, there has to be some national framework or some sort of national consensus. And in our context, that national consensus is in the Constitution, which guides how we are going to be electing political representatives and how we're going to create public institutions that will help support this democracy, including parliament, and so on and so forth. Now, so that's where the election part come in and the role of elected representatives. And I think someone raised the point around the conflicting nature of a multi-party democracy with what could, in our context, be the Tao. What's our Tao is contained in the Constitution. But the conflicting nature of multi-party democracy probably makes it impossible. Or is it a problem? Or how do we make that work, so that we achieve, our Tao? And then the selection process should ideally be, your mandarins, your public servants, from your directors general, downwards, and so that's where the process of selection of people who will help us, breathe life into this. The political aspirations that are expressed by the people, that should be, those who bring life into this institution, strengthen this institution, ensure there's no corruption, and so on and so forth. But essentially, make sure that this institution serve the people. So that disconnect is important. But also, just a general point, Prof. The whole question of balancing the results of development internally in China, how is that being managed? Because if it's a mixed economy, which we also say we are, but China having this long-term planning, which we also have, both long and short-term. Obviously, there would be certain bubbles that may want to burst outside of your plan. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with, for instance, overaccumulation or overproduction, which may not only affect you internally, but also affect things that happens elsewhere. So what becomes the role of the state, and so on. Because in our case, I think the incapacity of the state in that regard and the need for us to build, that state capacity in that regard, to be able to monitor and ensure that we do not have, I think you said the soup, bubbling out, and therefore either overwhelming the Tao or basically even deviating, from the Tao. Thank you.
So, thank you, Deputy Minister. I will tell you the Chinese experience for your consideration. At the end of the Cultural Revolution, the country is pretty much divided. Chairman Mao was held in high regard by many people. Yet the Cultural Revolution obviously was a disaster for the Chinese economy and for many other reasons. So we started actually from some intellectuals. They initiated discussion. But at that time, going through the Cultural Revolution, Chairman Mao was treated like a god, So whatever he said must be correct. You cannot change that. It's like something from God. So some Chinese intellectuals started a discussion called the debate on the criteria of truth. So the debate officially called, in the end, practice is the sole criteria of truth. That's also confirmed by Chairman Deng Xiaoping. He said we should debate on that. All kinds of views. In the end, we said practice is the sole criteria of truth. So we, rather than examine the results or performance of a province of a particular leader based on his words, agreement with Karl Marx, agreement with Chairman Mao, we should look at the results. So it's much more result oriented. So this is, we went through this nationwide discussions. At that time, it's mainly through printed media for about half a year. They reached consensus. Most people think, we call the emancipation of the mind. When you are emancipated from the whatever restrictions, then you think all of a sudden, we can reform a lot of things. We can borrow good ideas from outside, from other countries, from China's past. And so that reform and opening up began. Second concern is constitutional reform. I just wonder, I had an interesting discussion years ago with Professor Stiglitz, this Columbia University economics professor, Nobel laureate, when we were discussing about the reform of the American political system. He agreed with me this rigid legal constitutional framework. As a result, many reforms became more difficult. I use this example of the gun control. He said his idea was even within the U.S. constitutional framework, there is a possibility to change the system. He said you have to read the Constitution very carefully and then find certain rooms for reforms. For instance, like the expansion of the membership of the Supreme Court, etc. So I wonder whether, through careful study of the South African Constitution, whether we can manage a certain type of reforms within the framework of the Constitution. Even in the case of China, because our reform started with the abandoning of the people's communes, which were too rigid. But when we start experiments of reforms, Constitution is still there. So technically speaking, this Constitution, this reform initiative in 1978, 1979, 1980 was against Chinese Constitution because people's commune is still there in the Constitution, which is a part of the political institution protected by the Chinese Constitution. Yet within the Constitution, there is also the overall principle of people's happiness and modernization, these moral principles, which can be used to justify certain experiments. So I think there must be some ways and means to make sure that reforms can be carried out within the existing legal framework. Now, concerning this state planning and readjustment, indeed, I just give the example of the Chinese 5-year plan and its readjustments. Indeed, the 5-year plan is the idea from the Soviet Union. But in the end, Soviet Union abandoned because the Soviet 5-year plan is what we call the mandatory planning. How many shoes one particular factory will produce? This is ridiculous, not working. So the Chinese 5-year plan is called the strategic planning. It's for, say, next 5 years, we're going to AI and big data and EV. And strategically, we have to plan, say, several cities, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Hangzhou will be the pilot cities to test different approaches. I just give example randomly. So this strategic planning. Then every year we have in March what we call the 2 sessions: the session of the People's Congress, the session of the Political Consultative Conference. It's almost like Chinese Congress and Chinese Senator. And then they will discuss the Premier's work report. Much of it is about the last year's performance, execution of the 5-year plan, and this year's execution of the 5-year plan. And we'll see whether we have made certain mistakes, whether a particular area we should make revisions. Then at the end of the year, November or December, there will be parties' Central Economic Conference. Again, discuss this particular year and next year. So there is an annual discussion on the implementation of plans. Plus, from time to time, the Political Bureau's Conference on economic matters. So within 5-year plan, we have annual adjustments and the modifications and December, and then throughout the years through the Political Bureau meetings. So it's not saying that Chinese plans make constant readjustments, but the overall direction is on the whole there. That's important. In next 5 years, what we'll do, what will not do, what will be the priority, what will not be priority. This is very clear, and this is very important. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Prof. We're gonna get the colleagues and give them a minute to ask one question each in the following order: Safora, Bonolo, Mandisa, Keitumete, Lelwe, Zingisa, and Tembekile. So please, a minute question to each of you in that order. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Yes.
Okay. I can't see anything to put on my video, so I'll just speak quickly for a minute. I'm speaking not as a professor, not as a doctor. I have an MBA, but I actually want to put away the academic hats and speak to you as an ANC activist, an ANC comrade. Yeah. And my question might be simplistic from the academic point of view, but I think is a very important issue we're grappling with in South Africa. Number one is that over time, through issues of patronage, nepotism, etc., our what you call a state council, I think, but our cabinet has increased to 73 members, And we've got and we, the ANC, have introduced the notion of deputy ministers who don't actually have a role, who don't participate in cabinet meetings, but who are there. So this is all patronage stuff, and we are known to have the second largest government in the world. China, on the other hand, operates very successfully with a small state council of 26 members. So if you could please explain how the choices and decisions are made around the size of the state. Thank you.
We go through all one by one. One by one. Okay. I'll give an example. This is ideas for the CPC. It is going through the 22 years of armed struggle. So it's indigenous political form. And then with Chairman Mao's first 3 decades, we have also ups and downs, all kinds of experiences. So by now, our model is much more mature and sophisticated. It's clearly this Dao and Shu. For instance, I'll give you an example. By the year 2012, if my memory serves me right, when Xi Jinping came to power, before him, we have 9 members of the standing committee, members of the political bureau, the most important echelon of the top leadership, 9 members. But over the past 10, 20 years, we felt that this is still too big. So we decided to shrink them into 7. So now it's a system of 7 standing committee members. So top action leader, Xi Jinping, together with 6 members. And each is responsible for several areas of Chinese political, economic, social life. And then you have over 20-something members of political bureau. So this change from 9 to 7 is what I call the from Dao to Shu. The Dao, the overall purpose is to how to make the state, the party, more responsible and to the daily work of the huge state and party machine. So the thing we have to prove efficiency. So the Dao is fixed. Let's do it in terms of Shu, procedures and specifics. So the party congress initiated this idea to change its 9 members into 7 members. In other words, you need to have an overall purpose which is above the legal framework, above the specifics. Otherwise, you cannot make any reforms. So the criteria is, as we say, people's livelihood oriented, people-centered. How to serve the country better, how to serve the people better. You must produce most efficient way of governance. Otherwise, if you have this purpose, then you try to work out reforms. So China is known to be the expert on reforms. We have called this period from 1978 reform era. So every day we talk about reform. Every month we talk reform. Every year we talk about reform. So that's the feature of today's China. Yeah. With reforms, you also make more progress.
Let's take 2 back to back, Gitu and Hao. Back to back with your microphones on, please. Gitu and Hao.
早上好，早上好，你好，谢谢你的师姐。Thank you to the minister as well. I'm actually a Fudan University alumni. I studied at the School of Language and Culture, so I'm really excited today. It's a real treat. My question, you spoke a little bit about the cultural differences between China and South Africa in terms of our respective historical experiences. And it's interesting that you mentioned the years of humiliation that I guess China faced, over the years and over the in past years, the opium wars and stuff like that when China lost face. And I think that's part of the reason I always say that China, I think, will stand its ground even in this trade war. And I noticed last week, I think one of the publications in Beijing actually quoted or referenced Chairman Mao's on protracted war, his essay, which kind of signals to me that there's a big encouragement in China about, just around national resilience to, the obvious coming difficulties that are coming that will be obviously temporary that you'll work around. My question, and I focus specifically on society and societal morale in terms of development and poverty alleviation. I want to ask you, in terms of just the China development model, where does futures thinking and building future scenario fit in on a practical level at policy development phase, either national or implementation at a local level? And just that, part of China's success, I think, is attributed to the level of social cohesion and social order. And just how people understand that, where we're coming from, we don't want to, basically Chinese society does not want to revert to where they're coming from. And it's like, they're building themselves to be the great nation that they've always, been told that, even along, Chairman Mao's dreams, what he felt China could become. But today's generation is growing up in, I think, excessively good times. In South Africa, I can compare it to the South African context of children that were born after 1994, who we call born frees. And they kind of lack the context of, the lived context of where we come from, and the hard work that needs to happen now and the sacrifices that need to happen now so that we can actually build a better future. How does the current Chinese system work at a practical or societal level to ensure that this generation, there's a saying that, how does it go? Hard times create strong men, and strong men create good times, or something along that line. The rest of it. So how does the Chinese system, in terms of, when you look at the future, 10, 20, 30 years down the line, how does the current system work to ensure that this current generation that is coming up now, that is being born now, does not become those proverbial weak men that the saying speaks of? And I think when you think of that, I think a lot of the South African conversations and the South African nuances, the younger generation completely misses. And so they don't have a developmental context, when they view the state of our country and stuff like that. I just wanted to know how China views that and and how that fits into the general societal makeup and how the society is structured.
Okay, Mandisa.
And I'm glad you are from Bhutan as well, like Busani. He's also our alumni.
Mandisa.
Perhaps it's in a way in human nature. People tend to complain a lot about the young people. Always, in my generation, we are da 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 da. Your generation, no. But in the end, we find that each generation has its own strengths and weakness. Same with China. I remember for my parents, they will say, your generation is no hope. Revolution will be by your generation. No, it will be over. So Chairman Mao said, all the young people must go to the countryside to be tempered, tested. So he wages cultural revolution. In the end, of course, the result was not that good. But in the end, he found that each generation continue with certain parts of your own tradition. And then they have their own innovations, their own creativity. For instance, we in China today, we would say, those born after 1990 are the most confident generation because if you look at opinion surveys, about 40% of those born after 1940, they believe firmly China is already much powerful than United States. So it's very confident. But before that, they were born in 50, 60, 70, they're less self-confident, especially universities, etc. Yet you look at this, those born in the 1980s, that's DeepSeek generation. People did not realize, all of a sudden, they created DeepSeek. In Hangzhou alone, a city near Shanghai, they have 6 little dragons, 6 AI companies, which are doing extremely well by international standards in AI, robots, and other innovations. So each generation has their own strengths and weakness. So we don't need to worry too much about that. But it's important that, as the leading party, say ANC, we should be able to mobilize the people, especially the young people. The Chinese approach is what we call we try to shape overall national consensus on what we call how to translate 最大公约数, the maximum social common denominator. Yeah, so people can agree upon, say, improve people's living standards. We live a better life. So we create a better economy. That's something we can all agree on. Yeah, so that's the minimum we can agree on. Then work on that. And then, of course, other consensus, other priorities, but this is the minimum, something we can do. And since you mentioned the Chairman Mao, I think we should also, sometimes it's really history, a dialectical relationship between leader and the overall population. I not long ago gave a talk in China on the role of Chairman Deng Xiaoping in China's decades of reform, China's economic takeoff. I said, fortunately, we have Deng Xiaoping. He made 3 initiatives which became crucial for China's success. Number 1, in 1978, he made decision China should embrace reform and opening up. At that time, there were other alternatives. In the end, his choice was great. In 1989, he was the leader who decided to have these forceful measures to handle the Tiananmen crisis. In retrospect, without that, China would follow suit of Soviet Union. The country will break up. Then in 1992, he went to Shenzhen, what we call the Southern Inspection. At that time, people were debating about the market economy was good or not. He said, don't debate on that. It's meaningless. Market is something neutral. It can serve socialism, it can serve capitalism. If we have communist leadership, we make it serving socialism. So end of this. So these 3 decisive strategic options made the Chinese reform a success. In the process, if there are no Deng Xiaoping, history could be different. Same with Xi Jinping. So sometimes people say, we're lucky in many ways, If, say, Deng Xiaoping died 5 years earlier or 10 years earlier, the situation could be different. So history sometimes experience and encounter really importantly good leaders, and good leaders play a decisive role in retrospect. So this is something you cannot, it just come out naturally. We see history creates its own heroes. Hopefully, other countries, including South Africa, will also produce Mandela and other, leaders of same caliber, and then make your course more smooth. Thank you.
Okay, just to manage time, we'll take 3 quick questions. Mandisa, Pao.
Thank you. I have founded an initiative called Student Focus SA. It's dedicated on empowering students in higher education to contribute meaningfully to nation building, because we believe that a robust pipeline of young leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs
through education system are imperative for sustainable national development through creation of sustainable new enterprises and emerging industries. So in this light, how can higher education institutions in our region become more intentional and effective in fostering innovation, leadership, and entrepreneurship among students to catalyze political, economic, and social transformation? Because we currently see a generational and institutional disconnect where we have aging elites and siloed thinkers. So how can we bridge this gap and utilize the young population in South Africa to build an inclusive and aggressive future-focused ecosystem? Because we believe that industries can change the course of South Africa, especially in unemployment. And young people need to be central in that, but higher education is very key to making sure that it becomes sustainable. Thank you.
How can we take another one? How?
Yes. Thank you and good afternoon to everyone. The DM and the two professors. Can you hear me?
How? Please, you must exit one of the two devices we are using. Let's move to Sunny in the meantime. Sunny. Or we go to Bonolo. Are you there? Can you hear me, Bonolo?
Thank you, Prof. Besani. It is actually Indi Shabalala who's been appointed. Can you hear me, Prof?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Okay. One, Prof. We are taught by Chairman Mao, and especially quoted by Nelson Mandela, that when it comes to the question of the economy, we do not care whether the cat is black or white. We just care whether it can catch a mice. And I wanted to understand with regards to the approach of, or with regards to the foreign direct investment in China, what has been the best approach in utilizing and implementing those resources and considering the policies that China has in terms of the social and economic development policies vis-a-vis those of the investing parties? Is it a concern to them as to whether whoever invests focuses or deals with their policies specifically? And in so doing, how do they challenge the rumors and messaging around the suppression of the freedom of speech and activism, and the notion that there is cheap labor around China? How do they then deal with those rumors and those stances across in terms of the messaging and agenda? But lastly, just as from a unionist perspective, I wanted to find out what is the stance of the government of China with regards to unionism and organized labor, and how then did they implement bestly the 24-hour economic development or policy? Thank you, Prof.
Okay. So concerning the first question, high school education and then working experience, professionalism. I think China has been doing something right since 1949. Our priority is always given to hard sciences, STEM, science, what's called the mathematics, engineering, physics, and etc. So this hard science is always China's priority through all these years. Even today, if you go to a typical high school in China, the best students prefer to study hard sciences, which is something very unique. It's totally different from the West. And as a result, every year produce more engineers and scientists than Western countries combined. That helps China's succeed in this new tech revolution, AI revolution. And then you refer to Chairman Mao and Chinese leaders. we have a slogan, which is also important, but it's more at the time of Chairman Mao. Now we speak far less, but I think his message is correct. He said that as a young student should be both read and expert. You cannot be just expert, but not read. The idea is you have to be politically conscious, to have to work for the cause of socialism, etc. So this is also important. In other words, I think not necessarily use the word red or not, but use the word of patriotism, sense of devotion for a great cause of your country, your nation, your party, etc. Something bigger. This is important, rather than just boil down to technical details. So this political education is also important, which is still part of the Chinese educational system. Although I must say it's not doing very, very well, but it's still there, political education, which is important. Yeah. So we try to balance between both political education and professional training and education. And this is very important. Now, concerning this FDI, foreign direct investment, in the case of China, for many years, it's a necessity because we did not have enough capital for China's modernization investor in the Chinese mainland because it bring about Chinese US dollars and foreign currencies, convertible currencies. But now this is less a problem. At that time, many years back, it was a problem. So you need a foreign income, foreign currency. So we need a foreign investment. And also we try to learn something in terms of management, in terms of foreign technologies. In management, we learned quite a lot from the West, but in technologies, not that many, because most Western countries apply sanctions even way before the Donald Trump, the Paris Club and other things, because China will consider communist. But still, we try to, at the time of reform opening up in the 1980s, whether China should embrace globalization or not, Deng Xiaoping made a very important decision. He said globalization is inevitable, but we have to be selective. So we should try to maximize its benefits and minimize its effects. So that's how we do it. So we divide globalization into political and economic. Political globalization, we said no, thank you. You remember, for many years, it's about the democratization, liberalization, privatization, etc. So this political part, we said no. Yeah. But economical liberalization, we said yes. So WTO rules, international trade, free trade, we embrace it. But again, selectively. For instance, in certain areas, capital market, we are still very cautious. Even today, we are very cautious about opening up China's capital market because we know Wall Street want to swallow up China's economy, China finances. So are very cautious. But in other areas, we are very open. Yeah. So in the end, I met with the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. He said that we have quite admiration for the Chinese because you can beat the United States on its own turf. WTO was a creation of the United States, but now United States abandoned WTO. It's working for China, but we follow strictly WTO rules. Of course, in the end, we think it's not China the champion of the free trade in the world against Donald Trump's whatever, against WTO. And in other words, it's not, have to be realistic. I remember in the 1980s, early 1990s, when so many Western companies like Microsoft, like Apple, they came to China, invested in China. They provide a lot of job opportunities. But out of, I don't remember exact figure, so out of every $10, US companies, Microsoft or Apple, other intermediary companies, will take out $9. Chinese work only got $1. Yeah. So this is roughly the proportion. But even at that time, Deng Xiaoping said, even with this $1, it's also important for China. First, it creates certain jobs. It makes improving people's living standards. And then, you can also learn something in terms of technology, in terms of management. So we have to go through that era, that period. But now, of course, China moves up in the value chain. That's also why Donald Trump and Biden launched a trade war, tech war against China. They will not allow China to move up in value chain, but we'll do that for sure. So this is a dialectic process. If you have a long-termism, the short-term over difficulties can be controlled, can be mastered. So this is something, the state capacity is very important. Otherwise, you cannot work on that. And concerning trade union, in the Chinese case, it's different. We reject Western model. In the Western model, the union and management is somehow in permanent. Even Europe, the unions are more what we call the became self a kind of in serving its own interests, but that's another story. In the case of China, it's very clear union is under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. And union plays the role of the interface between the management and workers. So they are not opposite to each other. They work between the two sides. So that's important. So I said in the case of Chinese model, social model is the interactions, positive interactions between the two sides. So this is very important. The state sector, management sector, and the private sector and social sector, they engage in interactive interactions with each other. I think this is a better model than the Western model, American model, which pitting one side against the other side. So there's a social cohesion. I met with a Swiss friend yesterday. Switzerland also had this model. Union and management, they engage in consultations with each other. They try to find a consensus and solve their problems rather than confronting each other. So in the case of Switzerland, there are very few strikes, unlike in France, where strikes is so often, especially when you held Olympic Games, workers began to strike. And so the case of China is more similar to Switzerland. It's consultations, interface between the two sides. So that's my brief answer to your question. Thank you.
All right, the last question we will take is from the General Secretary of the Trade Union, Kosatu Zingiswalosi. You will be the last to answer. After that, we will then go to Deputy Minister Manamela to touch on some of the questions and then round up, and then Prof. Zhang Weiwei will do the same. GS.
Thank you so much, Prof. It's the president of COSATU.
Sorry, I'm sorry. President, yeah.
Thank you so much, Prof.
I want to show you video, or you are somewhere on the road.
I'm on the road, so
okay.
No,
okay.
It's fine. Prof, I indeed, as a representative of workers and a member of the BRICS Trade Union Forum, and I want to ask this question to Prof. Zhang, that given the imbalance in economic power within BRICS, how do we ensure that South Africa is not reduced to a market for Chinese goods or a recipient of infrastructure loans, but we stand as an equal partner shaping a fair and mutual beneficial development agenda? And lastly, and importantly, Prof, is that South Africa urgently needs investment, no doubt about it. But we also have a duty to protect our local industries, to protect jobs and workers. Now, my question is, from the China's own experience, How can we strike that balance where we're welcoming investments while making sure that it aligns with our national interest without us being labeled as protectionist, or rather risking deterring the much needed capital? So how do we strike that balance? And of course, we are not here to engage on the last part of Prof response on Chinese trade union, but I take that. Thank you very much, Prof.
For the Chinese approach, because for this whole Belt and Road initiative, it's based on the overall political philosophy, which I think is very positive. It's called the discussing together, building together, and benefiting together. In other words, a country or a company or region join this Chinese initiative out of its own initiative, out of its own interest. And the process is, in many ways, very democratic. Otherwise, you can't imagine, within 1 decade, it's already $1 trillion invested, over 5,000 projects, over 150 countries participating, including South Africa. So I think this is the overall picture, but I cannot rule out a lot of problems in the way. You may know this, that in certain countries. But I think we are faced with a vicious opposition from the Western countries, especially from the United States during the Biden era, now perhaps slightly less, because they take everything as hostile. Actually, we welcome Western companies to join us. And now China, EU are working on that because of US, whatever, Donald Trump. We think we can do a lot together for other countries, including for those in Africa. So it's not a zero-sum game. In other words, we're open to discussions. We're open to joint initiatives. But it's also necessary to note, China is what we call now a mixed economy. Today, most Chinese companies, including Huawei, working in Africa, in other countries, are private companies. So state company usually says we try to set up, infrastructure for a special zone, and within zones we invite private companies to come. Because from our experience, even within China, if something entirely conducted by the state-owned companies, it's not that it cannot be lasting, it has to be viable through market system, market mechanism. So as a result, a lot of, I think, talks and negotiations between Chinese companies and, say, South African trade unions, South African companies are required. I think hopefully your union will also join that. But one thing, from my limited study in certain African countries, not South Africa, but in other countries, is because there is the idea in the case of Chinese system, we emphasize a lot on what we call the holistic interest of the country, of the nation. Of course, we have a powerful pro-development, strong government from the central, which is very important. It's good for China. So if a certain opposition to certain projects, then central government can say, of course, have consultation with you in terms of the overall interest of Chinese economy, in terms of creating overall jobs for Chinese workers. Maybe that project should be held. Then we try to solve whatever differences. In other words, we try to not only look at our own interest from, say, a particular union and its members, but also from the overall interests of the country. That's the role of the Chinese Communist Party. That's why we have made it very clear it's under leadership of the Communist Party, which is about the overall interests of the nation. Otherwise, take EV as an example. take what we call the ecological civilization as example. In my lake near Shanghai, it closed off over 10,000 factories which produce polluting whatever materials. But we shall have to stop them. We have to find opportunities for them. And we met a lot of resistance from these companies. But it's overall interest of the country, of the nation, of the people said, no, we should abide by this overall interest we call Dao. It's above, it's stronger than the specific interest. But the process is rather democratic. But in the end, after consultations, we must take actions, so-called democratic centralism.
All right, thank you, Prof. Deputy Minister, your summary. In fact, there was a question also that you need to answer. Charlie, you want to ask him that question? She will answer the question and then summarize here.
Yes, thank you very much for hosting us. Thank you, Professor Busani, and thank you for all of our experts and attendees from South Africa. And this is the first session of many to come. In future months, we'll focus on some other topic areas that are affecting the 21st century world order and the state capacity that is needed to cope with the new challenges in this new era. In the coming months, we'll be talking about the 70th anniversary of Banlon. We'll be talking about the upcoming BRICS summit in South Africa. We'll also be sharing China's experiences in economic, technology, and industrial development. But that being a forecast to what's to come, today, if I can use the last remaining few minutes to ask a question on behalf of our associates and audience here in China to Deputy Minister Manamela, is about this is perhaps a little out of line from what we've been talking about today, which is about political model and the capacity building, but it's very much linked to the challenges that we face in the 21st century, or especially in the immediate future. Is this has been coming up as a topic more and more frequent of recent, is what's to come after, and there is an emerging somewhat of emerging consensus about the decline of the status of the United States dollar as the world's reserve currency. The questions that we received overwhelmingly here is to hear how policy advisors and policymakers in South Africa think about the prospect of what the world might look like after US dollar's decline from the status of the world's dominant reserve currency. And also given that in the context of BRICS, there have been floating around quite a few discussions about in the official and unofficial capacity about the building of a possible alternative currency that engages many other nations from the global south, the BRICS nation members, and some form of new digital currency that may be pegged not to any specific country or any one particular product, but to the productivity and the goods of a range of countries. Now, these are all possibilities and discussions that are floating around. We'd just like to get a check-in on the mindset, that the attitudes that policy advisors and policymakers from South Africa, how do you see this prospects of what's to come after the US dollar?
Thank you so much for that question. I'll deal with it just a bit later in a moment. I just want to start with the just some brief reflections towards closing it. I think what are probably our key takeaways from this discussion around political models and state capacity and how to respond to the polycrisis. And I think for me the big takeaway is I think the notion of a hard state, but hard state not in authoritarian or dictatorial format, but a hard state that would be insulated on what becomes a long-term, project, and of course, in between, with what Prof. Zhang refers to as 5-year terms, which will be subjected to whatever political moment and whatever balance of forces that prevails at those particular moments. But I think it's important that we identify what the long-term intention of the state is, and insulate that state capacity to be able to deal with that. It means building a particular kind of a cadre within that state, because one of the big challenges Prof. Zhang, is that not only is political not only exist a political multi-party system in terms of democracy, but also in terms of the state. I mean, we cannot deny the fact that the state in itself, the public service in itself, public administration, is politically contested, and so the unity and cohesion of the state, is going to be important in the long term. So for me, that's the first and big takeaway. The second one is, around the building trust. You spoke quite extensively around, how Chairman Mao, as a popular leader, had a society entrusted on him, and that's critical. And whether it's in the form of an individual like Mandela or Mbeki, or it's in the form of state institutions, and I think that that's very, very critical. So that sort of political trust has to be rebuilt consistently, in spite of our colonial and apartheid history. The third, I think, big takeaway is that in as much as we're formal democracy, parliament, local councils, and so on and so forth, I think what is also crucial in what you insist is part of the Chinese model is people's continuous participation in the democratic process. And yes, there's provision for those, platforms such as, planning meetings at a local level to determine, what are the needs of that community, contribution from experts and so forth to contribute to the local plans. So there is provision for those, but are those really being taken into account for? But not only democracy at that level or continuous engagement with the people at that level, but also in the workplace. You could hear the president of COSATU's hesitance in engaging with you, Prof. Zhang, around what happens in the workplace. But I think democracy also at that level, democracy in higher education institutions, democracy everywhere else is I think, crucial. But what is the intention thereof? Because democracy doesn't mean, as you say, it's a binary. It's one against the other. But it could also mean that interested parties, and I think in our South African context, the South African people have, or it can only succeed if there is a united vision. So we are agreeing on this, and everything else that we do should be intended, to achieve this. There was a point around education, and how it relates to innovation, and I can't agree with you more. We have been emphatic around science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. There's even talk of STEAM, which includes the art. The understanding that society does not function in one silo. Philosophy connects with engineering, with culture, with the economy, and so on and so, and that's important. And so the role of higher education should be to appreciate that, that entire cycle. And then finally, global cooperation, I think there was a lot of emphasis, and I think the points that you're making around the role that China plays. Our leadership or chairmanship of G20 happens during a very tricky period. We are supposed to be handing over to the United States chairmanship, and that the process itself started in a very somewhat conflictual fashion, and I think we obviously tried to ensure that we maintain our cool and try and provide leadership in this regard. But I think those platforms would be important to emphasize questions of global solidarity. Those platforms will be also important to, for us to answer questions around what becomes the alternative, and maybe that's linked to the question that that was asked to me at the end. Issues around global currency and so forth. One of the things that the apartheid government missed in the 40s, when there was the transition from gold to the dollar, was ensuring that moment is used for securing our place as a gold rich country, in spite of the fact that gold was being substituted as a currency. And yes, there are discussions around the forms of alternatives that needs to be considered in terms of currency, or the form of exchange, and also payment systems. What I think the lessons learned, for instance, with Russia, Ukraine, and I think with the kind of stability that China has created in this period, is that as a country and as a continent especially, we cannot survive any form of regional attack on our economy, because we, for instance, do not have a sovereign payment system. We do not have a sovereign form of exchange, and I think that discussion have to go deeper into those kind of issues. But I think in the overall, thank you for this engagement, and I hope that we will continue engaging with the Chinese model and looking at lessons. And I think there are a lot of lessons for us, both as a country and as the continent, and hoping that from those lessons we will be able to interpret them, and create success. And I think the beauty with the Chinese model, Prof. Zhang, is that it's not about teaching others what to do. I think it's also about each one teaching one, and in the process learning from each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. We appreciate you being here, Prof. Zhang. We appreciate. Last month we had a session with Prof. Kishore Mabubani from Singapore. We have you now. We want to have colleagues from India, Chile, Brazil, and several other countries. Hopefully, our colleagues here in South Africa, but also in the continent, as many are in here today, will gain something from all these perspectives, because our understanding of the world, our understanding of how models have worked elsewhere, will sharpen our own statecraft here, because they will be shaped by those ideas. So we look forward to further engagement with yourself, Prof, as you do other sessions on this platform, and as you come to South Africa as well in August. As I said, several other people will be engaging, India, Brazil, Chile, and others in the global south. And of course, we do have sessions with some scholars from the global north as well. There's a lot to learn, from them. So we are an open platform. The idea is, as much as possible, those who save the state must have very clear ideas of what is happening elsewhere in order to rethink and re-theorize their own policies and their own programs as well. So from the National School of Government, thank you very much to you, Prof, and thank you to the Deputy Minister and everybody who participated in this session today. Back to you, Ms. Penn.
No, it's all from here. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. And Professor Zhang Weiwei, would you have anything to add in sum up of today's session?
Well, I've talked too much. Thank you all. I think it's a great opportunity to share my whatever findings from my own research on the Chinese model. And hopefully some of the ideas could be relevant for our friends in South Africa, in other countries. And it's again, because Busani, I tell you good news. Today I'm here giving this presentation. At the same time, another senior visiting fellow coming to our institute. You know him very well. Former Foreign Minister of Singapore, George Yu. He has arrived at the airport and he's come to the same office you occupied last time. Great. So both were working very well in China, in South Africa. We expect more cooperation between us. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, colleagues. Goodbye.
Goodbye.